Hey guys, this is David from Edge Studio with a super duper special episode of Home Studio Show and Tell. We have had 25 episodes in past, and we've seen a lot of voice actor studios. We've seen a lot of really interesting equipment, cool microphones, cool booths, the way people hang foam on their walls. We've seen it all. Well, maybe not, because today we're we're meeting voice actors who are blind and low vision. We're looking at their studios, how they read scripts. We're looking at screen readers and all sorts of interesting equipment that they use to perform their jobs. I want to introduce you to Lisa Bryant and David Goldstein, who have chatted with me over the past month as we set up this episode. They are the coolest people ever.
Maybe
Okay,
at
yeah, my
least.
kids. um, and let me hand this over to Lisa and Lisa, I'd love you to introduce yourself and David introduce yourself and then talk about why it's so special that we're doing this episode in October.
Sure. Well, first of all, David, thank you for hosting this. Thank you for the time and resources and all the support you've given us. I am Lisa Bryant. I am a freelance journalist based in Philadelphia, also co-host of White Canes Connect podcast. And David is the other half, the other host rather, and producer of White Canes Connect. So I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Again, David Goldstein. Besides White Canes Connect, I have my own podcast called I Can't See You. 7 letters. Sounds like a whole sentence. I'm Lisa. I'm actually wearing my White Canes Connect t-shirt today.
Mhm. So, as Goldberg was saying, October is Blind Awareness Month. In the National Federation of the Blind, there are many different blindness organizations, but one of the major national blindness organizations, we refer to it as Blind Equity Achievement Month. But whatever you call it, October, I believe since 2009, anyone correct me if I'm wrong about that, has been designated as Blindness Awareness Month. And it's a time to celebrate the achievements, the successes, and also highlight awareness of maybe some of the challenges within the blindness community. So it's very fitting that this particular home studio show is featuring you guys, blind and visually impaired artists in the field. And I guess we can just kind of start because sorry. Was someone saying something? Oh, one thing I do want to note is like not only is this perfect timing, but I think the group that we ended up with couldn't also be more perfect. I don't think Man's Hands alone could have gotten a better group of folks together. We have folks in the audiobook narration industry as well as audio description. And we'd love for you to each introduce yourselves and give like a lightning speed bio of you. And I guess I'll just call on someone to start. Annie, why don't you go first?
Good evening, or whatever time of day it is, wherever you are in the world. I am Annie Donnellan. I am a singer, voice actor, and comedian based out of Cincinnati, Ohio. I also do audiobook narration and audio description, and I keep a running calendar of various national food days. This is also National Pizza Month, you might like to know.
I was wondering who keeps track of that. So now I know you're going to be my go-to person.
Yep.
Uh,
Your walking calendar.
Melissa, why don't you go next?
Hello, everybody. I'm Melissa Riccobono, and I am from Baltimore, Maryland. I am also a singer. I enjoy comedy, but I would not consider myself a comedian, though I do really want to do some improv one of these times. I am an audiobook narrator, and I'm also editing a podcast for Blind Industries and Services of Maryland. I am the co-host of the nation's blind podcast for the National Federation of the Blind, and I'm very interested in getting more involved in audio description. And I also love audio restoration and collecting oral histories. Great to be here.
Thank you, Melissa. Thomas.
Yes. Hey, everybody, I'm Thomas Reed. I am the host and producer of a podcast called Read My Mind Radio, and that is a narrative podcast that combines sound design and music to bring you feature compelling people impacted by all degrees of blindness and disability in general. As part of that podcast, I also do a lot around the topic of audio description, and I'm also a audio description narrator, consultant, an advocate, and a member of the Social Audio Description Collective. And I'm happy to be here.
And we are happy to have you.
Thank you.
Edwina, all the way from Sydney, right?
Yeah, I'm near Sydney, yes. So my name is Edwina Gustafsson. I'm a freelance audio description script writer, and I've been working for an Australian TV channel, working on their commissioned programs, which has been amazing. And I've had the opportunity to write the audio description for a film and 2 3-part documentary series and more recently, an 8-part crime drama series, which has been really great. And I work in tandem with a sighted person to do that. And I'm very passionate about, I'm legally blind. I'm very passionate about people who are blind or have low vision being involved in the AD script writing process, because we are the end users.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
thank you. So as Goldberg said earlier, home studio is a space for artists to share what works for them in terms of their software, their technology, show off their home studio, what their booth is like. And Goldstein, actually probably both Davids, are more in the geek area, kind of geek out on this more than I do. I'm kind of a babe in the woods. But David, Goldstein, why don't you start when we were going to talk about recording and editing? I guess recording maybe makes sense to talk about first, like what works for folks in the area of recording software.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. And it's funny, as everybody's introducing themselves, and Melissa said, "Oh, I edit this podcast, so I've got a couple of questions there." And Thomas was saying a couple of things, and then Edwina with the writing the scripts, and they all sorts of questions started popping into my head. But yeah, the important thing obviously is before you do any of the editing, and you've got to record it. So at least in my studio, it's a very basic Zoom microphone with a Zoom PodTrack P4, and records right into, I actually record it into my computer. Thomas, when you record, what's your process like?
Yeah, so I have a dedicated box for my recording. And so I record into Reaper is my DAW of choice. I have an audio interface, which is, I should have remembered the name, but it's an audio interface. I don't get too caught up in it. If it sounds good to me, it's working. I use a Rode for most of my recordings now. I'm using a Rode NT1, and I have a guard here, a mouth guard, splash guard, whatever, and I have a little setup where I'll pull it down, but it will be blocking the view there. Right now, my microphone that I'm talking to you all with is actually a different mic. It's just a Shure M57, which goes into a different audio interface, which goes into my other laptop. I have like one keyboard and a nice little cool USB that sort of makes the connections where I can switch back and forth. And then all the audio that I'm listening to is all goes into a mixer that I can control everything there. So that's sort of my basic setup. But for the recording, it's just that straight into Reaper through the audio interface and a Rode NT1.
So when you record, do you record video as well?
No, I do not record video.
So, guys, let me just interject for a second. Lisa, beautiful introduction there. Thank you so much. And what I think is fascinating for everyone who is tuning into this is to learn what differentiates your studios. So, Thomas, you're talking about the mics, and your mics are good mics. They are also mics that a lot of us have in this industry. I'd love to hear a bit more about what makes your studio different. What is it?
Glad you asked that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to be interesting for us outsiders,
Mm-hmm.
and also for the group of you who are blind or low vision to learn what each other is doing is going to be, I'm hoping, super helpful because David Goldstein, as you mentioned earlier, you started having questions when Thomas and Edwina and Melissa were talking about what it is that they do. You already do what they do. And so there may be different apps that you can all use. So if we can kind of shift this conversation ever so slightly to talk about what differentiates your studio or what is special about your studio, Thomas,
Yeah.
as opposed to someone who is sighted.
So the difference between my studio and someone who is sighted is absolutely nothing. And so I'm glad you asked that question. What makes my studio special, quite honestly, is that I'm in it. So
I love it.
and it's in my house. That's
Good
what makes it
answer.
special.
You
But
know
there's
what?
absolutely
That
nothing
is a
different
quote I'm
about
putting
it.
up on my computer. Love it.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely nothing different in the process for me. The only thing is different is that I control all of that using a screen reader. And so that would be the difference.
Okay, let's hear about your screen reader.
Yeah, my screen reader is standard. I use two. So I use either NVDA or I use JAWS, Job Access with Speech. And, that allows me, that gives me the ability to control the software. So the software that I use to record and edit, the software that I use to manipulate my scripts, and the software that I use to read my scripts, because I'm not a proficient Braille reader, but I have quote unquote mastered the art of using my screen reader as what I call an audio teleprompter. So that would be the way I do that.
Fascinating. Okay. David Goldstein, let's hand this back to you to pick up from where Thomas just left off.
Okay, and that's Thomas said something that I have a couple of friends that have podcasts, and Reaper is their go-to for editing. All right, so let's go, Annie. Yeah, let's try. How about you?
Yes, I use Reaper as well.
Okay, it seems to be the thing that works as well as anything can work with the screen readers, whether it's JAWS or VoiceOver.
Right.
Could I say that?
When you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think there are a lot of other DAWs that also are working well with screen readers today. But I think for me, what Reaper brings to the game is that there's a lot of support, and it's by the blind community. And so the blind community has really taken on the art of creating the access for Reaper, maintaining that, and supporting one another. So for me, that's the biggest part of that, because there's a community who uses the technology that we use, a community of us for us. And that's sort of the thing about Reaper that I personally love.
Well, let's go back a bit because for people outside of your studios, they probably don't know what screen readers are. Can you tell us what is a screen reader?
Sure. Is that directed to me or someone else?
Anyone who knows.
I can do it.
Okay. Whoever said that, let's hear it.
All right, then. So screen reader is basically a program, a text-to-speech program that would describe anything on the screen, whether that would be, text, buttons, certain elements such as a table, what you would see as a sighted person. It describes that to us via speech. And recently it's starting to describe images with the help of AI. So that's pretty much what a screen reader does. Now you can have something like an audio desktop, for instance. There's a program for it, and that would be pretty much purely audio based, nothing visual on the screen. But it's basically the same concept, and we use it to, for instance, read PDFs, browse the web, and stuff like that.
So the only thing that I want to add to that is, because it sounds a little passive, is that the screen reader, while it does give you that feedback, it's fully being controlled by the user. And so, and that's with a combination of shortcut keys as well as Windows keys, or Mac. They have their own keys, keystrokes. So
Yeah.
it's not a passive thing, but it's a fully controlled by the user thing.
Usually you can just use a keyboard for it, but
That's what I'm saying, that the user is controlling that, as opposed to that the screen reader is just doing it. That's what I'm saying.
But if you have, for instance, if you have a Mac and you have a trackpad on it, you can just use it pretty much like you would use an iPhone, for instance. And I think on Windows you can use a touch screen, but I'm not too sure.
And
Melissa,
also,
I was just going to say, I see Melissa's back. So
I
she's
am.
back.
Thank
yeah.
you. Yeah, I was having a bad internet connection. I was just
Okay.
going to say, as far as screen readers go, the only drawback to screen readers is that if websites and software are not coded correctly, they do not always
Mhm.
work well with the screen readers. And so when Thomas was talking about Reaper, and the importance of Reaper. Reaper is also my digital audio workstation or DAW of choice because of the exact things that Thomas was mentioning. Even though to start learning it is, I was very, it was a really steep learning curve for me. I finally feel like I'm getting my feet on the ground. And part of that is because there's such a great email list that you can go to for support no matter what your question is. And there's people that will answer your question. But anyway, that only works because people are putting in many, many hours to have different things that allow JAWS and Reaper to talk well together and to work well together. Without those things put in place, I don't think Reaper would be nearly as functional. And that happens all the time. There's great plugins, or there's great websites, or there's great this or that, apps for the phone, apps for the computer, and sometimes they're working wonderfully, and other times they basically it's like a blank screen, even though you know there's something on the screen, but JAWS just can't talk to it, or NVDA, or whatever your screen reader of choice is, because it's not coded correctly. So that's a whole other thing that we probably shouldn't get too deeply into, but I think it's really important because if anybody here wants to start designing different equipment, it's really important to make sure that it's accessible. And I have some equipment that is accessible outside of the box that I'll talk about as well when we get into this a little bit more.
Melissa,
So
that's great information. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. I'd like to hear from Edwina. So
Sure.
you're doing so much work in audio description. What apps are you using right now?
So what I do is I work in tandem with a sighted person. So in terms of, home studio, there's nothing to see here, which feels kind of appropriate for an audio describer. I mean, I have right now I use a large, can't remember the
monitor.
size, but it's a gaming screen because it's curved and it's the right dimensions for me. So what I'm doing when I'm working in tandem with somebody through a video call like this, and we're not using the video, we're both looking at the media, the film or whatever it is, and we're just using the audio. Does that make sense? And so we're watching the show together. Sometimes I have a second monitor here. It depends. It all depends in terms of what I can see and what I can't see. And if it's something very dark, the gaming, I don't know if anyone here who has some vision is using a gaming monitor, but it makes the media darker because apparently that's just the nature of gaming monitors. So anyway, I either use my gaming monitor screen, which I use now connected to my Mac, or I use another screen which I have plugged in, and I watch the media with somebody else. And in terms of other equipment and other apps, there's nothing. There's nothing. I'm basically watching TV. And I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. There is a lot more to it than that. But in terms, and actually the sighted person at the other end who helps me with, finer detail, and I have a lot of trouble with skin tones. I think my world is sepia. And so I'm colorblind. So that person at the other end is actually typing in my words. I'm not trained in the AD software. I'm just watching the show and filling in the audio description. So there is no equipment except my Zoomed screen. And that's the writing process.
But
Interesting.
even though your setup may not be as, I don't know, sophisticated or needed, you don't need that many toys.
Yeah.
You and I have talked, and we'll get into this when we talk about audio description. There really is more to it. Well, there's one thing to know what to describe, what you're seeing, but how you communicate that to someone who is visually blind or low vision. So even though she may not have all of the trappings, it's a very important voice in this discussion. Should we talk now, David? You think about the editing, or is the recording and editing like that's probably one and the same, but just what steps do people find are trickier, especially using screen readers, or maybe easier with screen readers when it comes to editing and getting that thing, that podcast, that book narration, whatever that product is, to a point that you're really satisfied with? Oh, and you know what, Annie, why don't we start with you on that?
So your question is, what would you say are
Well,
the
we're talking
easiest
about
steps?
editing now. So walk us through, do you have to, when you do your book narration, do you need to send in the thing done, or like how do you submit your work? What do you have to do to it first?
As far as the final product, it all really depends on the publisher. Sometimes they'll ask for what they call a raw audio, which means that you do the recording and they will do the rest in terms of any editing, noise cancellation, whatever needs to be done. And some, like for ACX, for instance, they require a finished product. So you do all the editing and recording things. So I've learned a lot as I've done my ACX books in terms of like the recording process is easy. The editing,
Right.
because I am what they would call a recovering perfectionist. You have to go in and split items, meaning like if there is something that you said on one track that isn't correct, you could cut that off and split that as its own item, sort of like you're chopping a vegetable. I don't know. Am I going in circles?
In terms of the editing process, though, this is what I want to talk about. Just how much more cumbersome or not is it when you're using, and we said NDVA, we should tell people what that is, and I forget too. Is it non-visual?
Desktop
Non-visual
access.
desktop. Thank you. So when we're using our screen readers or whatever we're using, in addition to the editing software, just I'd like for people to kind of get into the weeds about that process. So Annie just told us what she goes through. Melissa, I think you talked about it. Plugins are your kind of savior.
No, I don't know that they're my savior, but I mean,
Okay.
so when you're talking about what's more difficult, I mean, I've never done it as a sighted person. So whether it's more or less difficult, I have no idea. I don't think it's any more difficult. Maybe because I'm using my ears and I can't actually see the sound waves or different things like that. Maybe there are things that are more difficult, but again, this is the only way that I've ever done it or learned to do it. And so I don't really find it difficult. My difficulty is number one, learning the software, because Reaper is incredibly powerful. And I did a little bit of editing with something called Goldwave, which it has great things about it. And I still love Goldwave, and I will still pull it out and use it for certain things, because some of its settings that it has that are just built into it really get rid of pops and clicks and filter noise and all sorts of things actually very, very well. And so sometimes I will pull that out and use it. But now I'm mostly using Reaper, and that means multiple tracks that you can have. It means when I have my podcast, for example, I can have one person's voice on one track and then the other person's on the other track. So if one person is talking and the other coughs or sneezes, I can edit out just that cough or sneeze without interrupting the other person that's talking. So that's really a nice thing about multiple tracks, which Goldwave couldn't do. But my biggest problem has just been getting my head wrapped around all of the different techniques that you can use, because in Reaper, and I'm guessing other editing softwares as well, there's often more than one way to do something. And then also just kind of getting my head around the different and I'm sorry, words are escaping me, but like the different vernacular, I guess I would say. What would I call what I want to do? versus what they actually call. And if they say this is something that I can do, is that really what I want, or do I want something else? Just sort of all the different ways that they name the different things that you can do, the different steps that you can take. But again, I'm able to do this editing work just like my sighted counterparts. And they say 1 hour of audio is usually 4 hours of editing, and that's about what it takes me. So I don't think I'm slower. I think it just means having good ears, being patient. And of course, the more you do it, like anything else, the better you get. I've also started taking notes. And so I know different commands. I was hoping to just keep all the commands in my brain, but no, that's not happening anymore because I'm over 40. So I've started taking notes, and that really helps me. And then having that email list to reach out to people and say, okay, here's what I want to do. I know I've done this before, or I know there's a way to do this, but I can't figure out how. So, I mean, I guess that's just for me, what has been really good. And just having now this podcast to actually edit once a month, I'm getting better and better and better because I'm doing it more and more and more often. And I'm happy when we want to go backward to talk about equipment. I do have a lot of equipment I'd love to talk about, but I know that I was not available when that discussion was going on. So whenever you'd like to go back to that, I'm happy to share.
Well, share.
Okay. So I'm a little bit different because a lot of my work is done on the road and not just in my home studio, which I don't really have a very fancy home studio at all. And so I use right now a Zoom H4 or a Zoom H6 essential recorder, which I against. I also have an Olympus recorder. I can't remember what model number it is. I want to say maybe it's a DM20, but I'm not absolutely positive. But the Zoom recorders are amazing because they record in 32-bit float, which means that you really aren't going to.
Melissa, your audio is cutting in and out, and we lost you for a bit there.
Yeah, I thought
Are
it was
you are
me.
you on the road right now? Okay, we've lost Melissa.
Melissa's talking about a product that I don't have one, but I hear really great things about it, and it is made with accessibility. So it has audio for the buttons. Anybody else use the Zoom recorders and can talk about them?
No, but I used to use the an Olympus, but it was a 510 that also had speech. It was a semi-accessible. I wouldn't say it was fully accessible, but it was a semi-accessible personal recorder.
I have the Zoom recorders. I have 2 of them, and I'm waiting for a third one to come along.
Yeah, do you have the essential?
I
The
do.
new essential ones that
I
are
do, because they're not real high-end equipment, but they're also not very expensive.
right.
And they are 100% accessible. They have talking menus. I can set the everything, you know, they anything that I want to set, the gain or anything I want. So yeah.
And it's accessible right out of the box. There's nothing you have to switch on
That is
before
correct.
you get to that accessibility. That's the beauty of it.
And you can turn that accessibility off if you're someone who doesn't need it, but it's wonderful. And I'd like to say 2 things about Reaper too. One of them is that it is a non-destructive editor. So you can make 100 changes to a recording, and then you can go back and unchange them one at a time, or you can go all the way back to the beginning if you want to before you made any of the changes. And regarding what's difficult in editing for a blind person, I'm a nature recordist, and I record mostly not in the studio, and I do okay with it. I use Reaper, but I know that sighted nature recordists can take a big, long, hours-long recording and look at a visual representation of what's being heard on that recording, and they can go to a click or something pretty easily. but I use something called auto trim a lot, which allows me to make a recording that might be 4 hours long, and I can trim out all the silent parts up to whatever level I choose to set it, and then go in and tell it to create different items for each of the segments that has sound in it. So there are lots of things like that that we can do with editing.
I was going to bring up the non-destructive bit about Reaper, and one of the main reasons I want to learn it. But as Melissa kind of pointed out, with the learning curve and all sorts of other things going on, it's hard to get, if I can edit now, then I stick with it. And I have had an issue where I have made a wrong edit and it was gone. I had to go back and bring in the whole audio track again, and kind of not really start over, but get to that point where I needed to chop that part out of the track to get it to back where it was. And maybe we'll have time to touch on this later, but what you're talking about there, as far as taking out the quiet spots, I don't know if that would be considered AI or not, but AI does. There's a lot of things that AI does now, stuff like that, taking out the ums and ahs if you need with a click of a button, so forth and so on.
I'd like to chime in, if I could, on something slightly different that Melissa said, unless anybody wants to follow on from that.
Take it away.
It's just interesting. I think she said 4 hours, 1 hour of audio requires about 4 hours of editing.
Yes.
She did.
So just in terms of the audio description, I understand like the work I'm doing is a bit different from what other people are doing here. And you know, whether it was more difficult for her than for somebody who's sighted. So in terms of the audio description, there is no doubt it is more difficult to do when you're legally blind than if you were sighted, because I have like 20% vision in one eye, which is pretty blurry vision, and the color blindness is an issue for the seeing. So in terms of that 4 hours of editing for 1 hour of audio, I might have this slightly wrong, but I'm pretty confident to say that like the crime drama series I did recently, a 30-minute episode, 2 days, 16 hours, 20 hours.
Wow.
To write the AD.
But you're also trying to, I think yours is different, and I could see how difficult it could be, because you've got to put in, there might be 3 seconds of quietness that you've got to squeeze something in. Is that right? Yeah. Does that happen? Right?
Yeah. And I am on a mission to, I mean, the audio describers, you know, that say what you see and describe what's on the screen. I'm like, yeah, that is, as I'm sure everyone here knows, really, really helpful. But I feel there's these nuanced, different ways of doing it, that subtle differences that make the access to the content as a whole more accessible. So sometimes what you see on screen for somebody who's sighted, it's not that useful. When we just want to understand the thing, right? It's so easy to get lost when you can't see what's on screen. So I just, from what Melissa said, I just want to say that absolutely writing AD is much more difficult when you can't see what's on the screen. And when I say I'm watching TV, I mean, I'm just joking, but I am. But I'm zooming in all the time. So, you know, I'm making people's faces like the size of my big screen to try and see their expression, changing contrast all the time. It's definitely more difficult. It does take longer. And yeah, there was episodes of the drama series I did recently that took 2 days. Definitely we didn't get one done in one 8 or 10 hour day. And then there was a film that that was the first project I did, though, a film that took, so it was about an hour 10 minutes, and about maybe 2 weeks it took. So it's a slow, it's not something, yes. And like you say, sometimes you have 3 seconds and you have 6 things you want to say, and you have to prioritize them and choose the words. It's definitely difficult, and it's more difficult if you can't see.
Edwina, I have a question. So So you're establishing that you are less efficient than a sighted person, but because you experienced low vision, very low vision, like with 20% vision in one eye, do you think you bring more to audio description than someone who is sighted?
I am very confident in my answer. Yes.
That's great.
Efficient, yes, in terms of time, yes, it takes longer because I can't see. I can't see for all. That's, you know, I'm an avid AD user, and there's a lot I'd like to change about the process. And I write the scripts that we know when we haven't, you know, when we can't see. I mean, I know everybody comes to low vision and blindness from different places, and some people like more detail, but in the end, we want to understand the show, right? We just don't want to get lost. We want to understand the documentary or the film or whatever. And yes, it takes longer, but I feel like it needs to have we need to be involved in that process. You know, before the recording, before the editing, people with low vision, blind people need to be involved in the script writing. And yes, that does require a sighted person. But I feel like, yeah, the end result, to answer your question, I do feel like people who are sighted lean a lot towards say what you see, which is not relatable for a lot of us, right? You know, fine detail. I mean, I've never had fine detail. Now is not the time. I'm trying to understand a film. Don't give me fine detail now.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
our brains adapt, obviously, right?
Okay, so 2 questions. Have any of you reached out to companies, equipment manufacturers or apps manufacturers, and suggested ways to make the equipment that you use more accessible?
Absolutely.
Thomas, what have
Absolutely. I mean, nothing specific that is coming to my mind, but I mean, I feel like probably everyone has written to an app developer to at least let them know, hey, this is not accessible. A website, I feel like that's a constant in the lives of blind folks who are online, who are in a digital world. Like that is part of what we have to do. And the frustration of getting back either, well, that's going to take a lot of time. That's not in our priority. Like we've received those. You know, if we're talking about audio description, and if we want to keep it real, it's been years that we've been trying to get streaming companies and all of these places. You know, I have the receipts. I have, I have letters that I've written to HBO back in the day where they were just like, it's not a priority. And thankfully they're doing it now, and they've made it a priority. But a lot of that has come on the backs of many advocates who have been doing that writing. And quite frankly, it's come on the back of 2020, if we're going to be honest. It was the pandemic that's probably pushed a lot of these folks into that world. But we've gotten there. But that is a constant. It's a constant part of the struggle.
Interesting. I have a question that was posed in the chat. I want to read. And Annie, thank you so much. I just saw your answer come. The question someone asked was to Edwina specifically. Oh, Edwina and everyone. They asked, what are some tips or feedback do you have for people who narrate audio description? What makes for good or bad AD? Annie, do you want to just speak out your answer, and then maybe we can hear from Edwina or anyone else?
I'd be glad to, yes. One of the first things that I said was to speak in a comfortable tone, a comfortable, energetic tone, but don't be patronizing. There's a difference between fade to black and fade to black. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And use language that you would use when talking to your friends. You can use sophisticated language. I mean, I don't mean necessarily at the doctoral level, but call it as you see it.
I think the language, I'm sorry, you were done, Annie? I don't want to.
Yes.
Okay, I'll make sure I had that pause right. So, you know, when it comes down to the language, I'm always saying that it should fit the content. So everything about AD should fit the content. So we're talking about, you know, there's a vibe. So for example, you know, it's an awful feeling to, as a consumer, to sort of watch something, say a comedy, and the delivery is really dry. I like to think about the narration and the AD is that this is the person I'm watching a film with. So if you're not into it, how am I supposed to be into it?
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm not saying over, right? But again, if it's a comedy and you sound like you're at a funeral, which is often what we're told to do, because that's been the way it's been done. So, you know, often it can be a directed thing. So the narrator might not have a choice. So it might not be that person's responsibility necessarily, right? Because they're being told what to do. And that dry monotone has been the standard. We're starting to get away from that, and folks are demanding that and asking for that, but really the content should fit. And that also goes for who is chosen as the narrator. And I don't just mean voice, I'm also talking about culture. And so the narrator should be of the culture of the piece. Because again, I like to think of that as casting, right? Would this person have been casted by the folks who are making the movies, the producers, the directors? If not, then why are they doing the narration? It takes away from the authenticity of the film itself. So all of that, the content should dictate it.
I would say too that it's really, really important to only describe what really needs description. If somebody knocks on the door, you don't need to say, she knocks on the door. You can hear knock, 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 knock. I think just in general, describers are getting much, much better about this. And also, Edwina, you were sort of talking, and I think you're exactly right as far as like going super deep. I don't necessarily need to know she has a red shirt, blue pants, band. I mean, unless it's really important, like
Exactly.
if there's like a red hat that's really going to feature in the show, that's important. But some other things just aren't important. I actually took a 5-day training from Joel Schneider, who is a person who has been doing a audio description for a very long time, and he has a really good book about how to audio describe. But it was just really good information and just things that you just might not think about. But the one that really bothers me is when people either tell me something that I would know from the sound of the movie, or start putting their own beliefs, or so instead of saying like she is devastated, no, let me figure that out. You should say something like she puts her head in her hands and tears fall down her face, or she crumples to the floor and shakes. Something like that would then lead me to think, oh, she's really upset about this, without you actually having to tell me that she's upset about it.
So I want to push back on that just a little bit, because some of the things that are, and I'm in agreement with you, but then there's also the idea that, you're limited by the amount of time. So in that example that you gave, she's devastated. What is that, less than a second? But the other ones that you were giving were way more than the time, right? A second. So it really often depends. And so I give a little bit of leeway to a writer, because there are those natural sort of limitations that one has when writing audio description. But I'm totally in agreement with you that I don't want to be told the story. But if it's not telling me the story and keeping me involved, if I'm weighing those two things because there's a limited amount of time, I will take the she's devastated. The other thing I would push back on is in terms of describing clothing. I'm one who believes that we have the opportunity to define and figure out what this film is about on our own, right? And whatever we bring to it. So for example, someone can analyze a film, and clothing can be important to that person. That could be the way they might see something in their analysis of this film. They might really get to something that's deeper that maybe I would not have. But because they have that access to that information, that might help them. And I'm one who definitely believes that access, I don't want to break someone else's access. So if that gives them access and I don't want it, I let it go. I just let it. Okay, I don't care about that shirt. It's red, But if that other person needs it, then I feel like, yeah, why shouldn't that be there?
Thomas,
why shouldn't that be there?
Because you rarely have in my experience, you rarely have the luxury of time. So
no, I understand. That's what I'm saying. However,
for me, I would leave out the red shirt if it's not important to the key message, because I would leave that out. I understand what you're saying, but because sometimes you've got 4 seconds, right? And if I've got a spare second, 2 seconds, really, anything less than 2 seconds isn't very useful. But if I've got a spare 2 seconds, I would rather add something to the more important information. You know, that's like the lifeline, right? Those key visuals that are going to help us not get lost. It's very easy to get confused, right? And
I
distracted.
totally get that.
And yes, I understand what you're saying, but it's constantly making choices. And so I would leave out the details about the clothes, because I really prioritize that main thread, that lifeline. So I would see if I can get in one more syllable or one more word about the key. It's just constant choices. And, you know, the thing is, and I think also something Melissa said as well, was recovering perfectionist. Yeah, that's what writing AD has I would
That
say.
was Annie.
It can't be perfect. It can't, you know.
No,
not
absolutely not.
Yeah.
But two things though. So I just want to, because what I think is really important that we just touched on that is often not said is that subjectivity, right? So the writer brings all sorts of subjectivities, but folks are teaching that audio description is an objective thing. It is not objective. It is absolutely not objective. There's so much subjectivity that goes into that. The second thing is that what we're not doing right now, and that what I've been advocating for quite some time, is to take advantage of other time, because I don't know about y'all, but there's this thing called the internet. I don't know if y'all know that, right? And so we can do what they do in live theater, which is create pre-shows. And pre-shows can be as long as you want it to. It can be formatted. So when someone wants that information, Edwina could take time, right, to describe, maybe it is the wardrobe, maybe it is the facial features, maybe it is more about the architecture, right? But I'm one who wants access. That's what I'm saying. And we have the ability to make access without the limitations right now, because the limitations aren't real. They're just specifically within the time that's in that film. But we have other ways to bring that out to folks, like a pre-show.
But do you want access to the frame or the scene that the sighted person can see, or do you want access to the visual content as a whole? You know, the key message from the documentary or the film. You want to understand like the greater message.
I want to be able to make the determination of the greater message, because what you give me might only be a part of what I need to analyze that movie. I want to be, when I'm in conversation with someone, and if I learn, someone who saw that cited, if we're talking about a film, and I learn about something that was not in the audio description, then I was lacking. I was lacking because I was not being, so that's my point.
Do you guys have audio description introductions in the
That's what I call the pre-show. That's what I'm talking about, a pre-show.
Okay, No, that's, I mean, audio description has only been on Australian free-to-air TV for a few years, and it's only on a couple of channels. We're very behind. I mean, all of the Netflix, all of that, you know, I listen to the AD on that. But yeah, in terms of the free-to-air channels in Australia, we are so far behind you guys.
Well, we're not taking advantage of intros either. So
let me
okay. Oh, really? Sorry.
Well, I'd like to interject for a second, because this is one of the honestly the coolest conversations I've heard. This is really, it's fascinating for me, and I assume for everyone else. But I do want to switch topics because we have so little time left. I'd love to see inside some of your studios. And you know what? Maybe your studio, some of you said, is just nothing different. But this whole show, Home Studio Show and Tell, is built upon the foundation of seeing someone's studio. And it's sort of cool. And even if we just take a 30-second glimpse, if you can hold your camera out, or if if that's comfortable for you, maybe just give us a quick show of your studio. Anyone want to
start with Thomas?
Well, I was going to say I can't move my my camera around too well, but what I can do is give you some description.
Okay.
So a little audio description of my setup.
So you're going to tell us what color microphone it is or not? No, I'm kidding.
I don't know if you want to know, but so no, I think what makes my desk, so this is a standing desk, because I'm trying to get away from sitting so much, right? So that was a big part of when I created this space. I can tell you, so this is probably about 4 feet wide here. The rest of this room, this is my walk-in closet, y'all. So this is my clothes over here, and I have a little divider. But I definitely, tricked out the walls and foamed it down and all of that type of stuff.
Wait, Thomas. So you're saying you've tricked out the wall, but to us, it almost looks like sheetrock. I can sort of see like there's maybe a thin curtain. What is
Mhm.
how do you define tricking out your wall?
Okay, so there's underneath this thin curtain, because the thin curtain was my wife's idea because it makes me, look better in the studio. What's underneath here is that packing stuff, but underneath that is foam. It's probably about 2 or 3 inches of what I use is not that egg carton stuff. I use the stuff that folks would use on their bed. It's much cheaper, right? That padded foam that
Like
will
a
go on your
mattress
bed.
topper?
Mattress topping, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what it's called. And you can get that quite cheaply in rolls that
Mm-hmm.
would, depending on your space, you buy a couple of that and you can, nail it down on the walls.
What about your ceiling?
My seal, okay, so here I made like a little drop ceiling. So just to make it the audio a little bit better. So I have some plywood that I put on top, it's on some brackets. And so it's dropped down a little bit lower. The ceiling is probably about 8 feet, but here it's probably only 6, just right where I'm sitting. So that just makes the acoustics that much better, I think. And this is also foamed out on the top. So on the bottom of that plywood there.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but on the desk itself, I had 2 layers just because the way I like to work. So when I do audio description, I edit to the timeline. So I don't just kind of record it all and somebody else does the mix. I also do a lot of mixing as well. And so I need to, since I told you that I have 2 machines, my script will be on one machine that I control with a separate keyboard. It's actually a rubber keyboard because I don't want sound. So I have a little rubber keyboard that sits on top of this little platform here that has some drawers in it that I can put, little cough drops. We like to have cough drops and stuff like that. And then I have my regular keyboard that is attached to via USB to both machines, so I can control the editing of where my recording machine, and I can do all of that with this standard keyboard.
I just want to clarify for everyone. When you talk about a rubber keyboard, the advantage of
And
that
hold
is
that
that
up.
it doesn't the sound waves don't bounce off of that, right? So
There's no sound.
right,
Yeah,
exactly. So you're avoiding more voice back, slap back, which is great.
exactly. And I can just show that to y'all real quickly. So here it
Let's see
is.
that, and then let's move on to someone else's studio.
Can you see that? It's just a little,
Oh
it's
yeah,
upside down, little rubber
Mm-hmm.
keyboard. It
yeah,
folds up. Yeah, it's pretty nice.
I
$16
see
on
those.
Amazon, y'all.
I just
amazing.
want to, before we move on, I just want to thank you, Thomas, because that is exactly how I was going to set up my closet. I was going to get a standing desk because I'm told that that's even better in terms of, I don't know, stretching the diaphragm or
Yeah, it
whatever.
can be.
But that's exact setup. So thank you. If it
Absolutely.
working for you, it's probably working for a lot of other
Well, but
people
Lisa,
too.
keep in mind that everyone is different.
Yeah.
So some people will move to a standing desk and they shift around a lot more. And
Mm.
if you are a shifter, that makes it hard, especially if you have a shotgun microphone. Because then
Shifter,
you're
not shifty though, right?
shifty. Yes. So, you need to really make sure that you stand in the same spot. And that can
Yeah.
be hard on feet sometimes. It can be easier if you're
Oh,
sitting down to be in the same spot.
I have a
Unless you're
thick
using
rubber mat on the floor too. I forgot to tell you that because
awesome.
of that comfort.
Okay.
What a
I'm at a standing desk on a rubber mat as well right now.
Yeah.
Let's hear about someone else's studio. Lisa, do you want to talk about yours?
Well,
Anyone?
no. I actually just wanted real quick. Did you say the mic? Oh, you said you use a Rode mic.
Rode NT.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All
Yes.
right. Something is flashing, by the way, Thomas, in your background.
Oh yeah, something flashing.
Something is flashing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
The light's
I
flashing.
think Thomas said what you had, Thomas, the Rode and you had a Shure 57 that you're
Sure,
using right now.
57. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't use that for recording, but just
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the zooms and stuff. Yeah,
57s, you know what, for dynamic mic, they are
they were
they're
nice. I
pretty
used to record with it. Yep.
yeah. There's some albums that have been the entire album has been
Oh,
recorded
absolutely.
on 57s. Yeah. Let's hear about someone else's studio. We're
Annie?
really down to minutes, but let's just get a quick walkthrough of what you have, your setup. Annie?
Hello. Okay. I would say my studio is very basic. It's a little corner of my office. We have a 3-bedroom apartment. This is my office, and it's comprised of PVC pipes that hold together these moving blankets. So when I enter in, I pull back the curtain. So there's a curtain here, and then there's blankets that cover the walls, and there's desk padding to drown out the sound. And I have my little chair because for longer form narration, you want to be as comfortable as possible. And I have my desktop computer here, my little desktop keyboard. To the right of that is my Scarlett interface. And I have the Shure SM70. I just got that and I find it to be pretty good. And I have my Braille display right there on my lap. Because I figure if the further away my Braille display is from the microphone, the less likely it is to pick up the clicks.
Yeah, no doubt.
Then to the right of my desk, I have a little lamp so that when I come into meetings like this, everyone can see me and they know that the light's on.
Do you guys step out for air from your booths? Just like to
Yes,
house?
because it gets pretty hot in here.
Yeah,
It gets pretty warm.
yeah. You too, Thomas?
Oh, definitely. But I also have a little fan under here. So if I'm not recording, if I'm just doing some editing, that fan is on. Yeah.
Right.
It feels good. Yeah. Yeah. But it's not too bad in here. So
Did we lose Melissa again?
Nope, I'm here.
Oh, okay. You want to go, Melissa?
I just had my video on. Well, is my video on? I can't remember if I think I turned it on.
Your video is on now, yes.
It's on. Okay, great. So my studio is, I mean, I have not really, I'm just in my living room and I just have my desktop computer and monitor, my Shure SM7, something like that, DB. Let me see. I actually have it written down. I also have a Samsung QU9. I'm sorry, Q9U. I have two of those that I use when I'm out on the road, and sometimes I will also bring my Shure because again, I'm recording a lot of podcasts in other places, and so I need to make sure that I have microphones that I can take with me and record. Sorry, I have my Zoom H4 or H6 Essential Recorder. That's just the H. This is the H4 because it has two XLR inputs, and then it has the mics on the top, and it's really great because it is 32-bit float, so you really don't have to worry much about clipping, and almost every setting, every menu, mixing, etc. talks. And so you really have a lot of control. There's a few things that they haven't quite gotten right yet. For example, when you're going through your file list, it does not talk well yet, and there's, you know, it just beeps at you. You can figure out where you are in the file list, but it's a little cumbersome. It would be much better if it actually would read you the date that the file was recorded and the time, but they are working on that, and hopefully soon. They're getting a lot of feedback from people that are blind and who use their recorders, but they're great outside the box, and so is my Olympus. I think it's the DM120 if I remember correctly, but it also talks for the most part. There's more on the Olympus that doesn't talk well, but the Olympus is nice because it has microphones that are built in, but it has different menu settings so you can set the scene. So like lecture, conference, meeting, there's different settings that you can use that are pre-built in that really do a very nice job of recording audio with those built-in microphones. I don't particularly like the built-in mics that Zoom has, the Zoom recorder has. I much prefer the XLR mics that you can put in there, and so either my Shure or my Samsung Q9U. The other thing I would say is I do go to a studio. There's a small room at my husband's work that is soundproofed, and so I do go there a fair amount and record, and that way I don't have to trick out my own house, my own living room, because our house is very small. That's nice, but I don't have a laptop yet, so I'm just recording on the Zoom recorder, and then I have to edit, so I can't punch and roll, which is a little bit annoying. And then I would say, though, that, you know, with these directional mics, when I do record, and I'm like you, Annie, I put my Braille display on my lap and I really don't hear the clicks. And I have been doing a book for our Maryland Library for the Blind, and the engineer has said that really, even just in my living room, he's not really finding it any harder than with any other volunteer, because a lot of volunteers just record from somewhere in their house. And with all the plugins that you have nowadays and all the different things that AI can do and et cetera, there's so much that can be done um, on the backside of production to really filter out that reverb, that or any background noises or whatever. Of course, it's nicer to record in the actual little studio, even though I don't have a laptop and I can't record on a computer. But at least I know that my kids aren't going to come in at the in the middle or anything like that. But you know, there's all sorts of different ways to do it, and I would say that if you get a good dynamic mic that's very directional, you don't have to worry as much about reverb, about other things. I mean, of course, it's nicer to get everything just right away, but there is a lot that can be done in post-production. So don't let not having a closet or not having soundproofing or not having the bells and whistles stop you from trying to create a demo or trying to do kind of some of this work.
Melissa,
Thank you,
those are
Melissa.
relatively new, the Essential line. Did you use that Olympus? Is that what you used prior to those?
I use my Olympus more. I never did a podcast with the Olympus. I did
Okay.
much more like all sorts of different, collecting sound. So in the Nation's Blind podcast, sometimes we would go in the community and do some interviews and things. So yes, I did use the Olympus for that. I've never recorded an audiobook with the Olympus, and I don't think that
Okay.
would be maybe there's a setting that would be good enough, but I would much rather use my Zoom for that, particularly because of the clipping, not 32-bit float. I don't know exactly what it means, but I do know that it means that you very rarely, if ever, would clip. And obviously clipping is bad. That's when you have distortion in your mic. And once you have that clipping, you really can't remove that. Maybe someday they'll come up with something, but clipping is not good. And my husband always laughs at me because even our broadcasts of our Baltimore Orioles games, I don't know who's engineering them. I don't know who's mixing that, but they clip all the time, and it sounds so unprofessional, and it just drives me crazy. And I just want to like take them and shake them and say, your mic's way too hot. Like, stop. There's no reason it has to
Let them
sound that
know.
way.
Let them know, Melissa. Let them know that
Yeah, I guess I
you'll
should.
be happy to edit their audio. Yeah, grab a client if you can.
Yeah,
Listen,
there you
we're
go.
I don't know
we're
enough,
really like out of
unfortunately.
time. I want to move us along. I just want to hear briefly about two other studios. If the people I call on can talk super quickly, that'd be amazing. I do want to hear David Goldstein. I want to hear your about your studio, and also Jerry. Being a nature recordist, I'm assuming that you have some interesting equipment in your studio. Jerry, can we start with you? Very brief, if you can, what you're using, what you're recording on well, you mentioned
Sure.
you're a nature recordist. Are you only recording nature outside, or do you also record voiceover or podcasts?
I actually do birding by ear, but I will record anything that flies, including jet airplanes. I love recording those. And so I don't really do much of the recording at all in the studio. I don't have anything to I have a Mackie mixer. I use a computer. I use Reaper. I have a Braille display, but most of my equipment is microphones. I have an amplified parabolic mic system. I have shotgun mics and omnidirectional mics and a whole bunch of different things, a Jecklin disc and things like that I love using. And that's pretty much it.
Oh, very interesting. Those are great mics. Wow. Thank you, Jerry. David Goldstein.
Okay, so here in Studio B, let me just grab my phone. The setup is the Zoom PodTrack P4, as I mentioned. I've used that the last couple of years. Before that, it was just simply a Sennheiser headset with the boom arm. Use a Sony ZV-E10 Mark I. And I do use a big monitor, but as everybody once I hit the microphone now, I do stand when I do everything. So the monitor is off. If the only way I hear what's on the monitor is if I have to read something, I've got to listen and repeat it. I can't read Braille and I can't read text on the screen. So it's a matter of listening and repeating, which I'm still honing but it's something that it's getting a little better each day. And just a couple of lights. I just started doing video earlier this year, and then behind it's just a little couch and some lighting and things like that. Nothing too extravagant here, and a bigger monitor for when I'm editing and whatnot.
David, did
have
you want your video on for us to see that, or did you purposely turn
Oh,
it
my
off?
video.
It
I
is
have the
on.
video on the phone, right?
Yeah, David is on in 2 squares right now. So you have to
Oh,
find the other
okay.
square. He's been
Ah,
showing us. David, a
okay.
quick question.
Sure.
So there's a little bit of ambience in your room, but not too much. But from the looks of it, it doesn't look like the walls are treated. Oh, the ceiling, I can see now the ceiling is treated. Looks
Well,
like
it's
acoustic ceiling.
so the ceiling tiles are treated. The ceiling tiles are a special sound tile. I don't remember. We bought the house around 4 years ago. This was built specifically for me. Inside the walls, while there's nothing on the walls itself, inside the walls is insulation that I don't remember what exactly he used. It works great, except for when the heater or air conditioner are running, which is just beyond the wall behind me, or somebody's running up the stairs. I call it Studio B because it's in the basement. And if my wife is cooking in the kitchen or the dog is running around in the kitchen, you hear it, and it is what it is.
Oh, very cool. This was a favorite episode of all of our home studio show and tells. The information you all provided was fascinating. I love the idea that some of you had counter thoughts to one another and you were able to build upon them. I love the idea of this community of exchanging information. I wish we had another hour, is what I wish. We don't. I'd like to,
Goldberg, can I just ask you one quick question before we let everybody go? Is
of
there
course.
anything in the chat that people would like to save? I haven't been monitoring it, but I
If
just want to
if
know.
you want to save the chat, you can download the chat because yes, once this meeting is over, that chat will be gone. And when we post these online, the chat is not posted with them. Let me look super
I
quickly
mean, I
through
don't even
here.
know if there's anything in there
Yeah, I'm
people
seeing
want.
thank you. This was a great presentation from someone. Thank you, everyone. A great session. I'm glad I could come tonight. I'm a firm believer in the pre-show. Thomas, someone wrote, I'm a firm believer in the pre-show. Oh, that was Annie. Thanks, Annie. um, yeah, there's not
Okay.
a lot of
Mm.
I think anything special in here that I'm seeing quickly.
Okay. Sorry.
No, Lisa, that was a great idea. Lisa, I really enjoy handing it over to you to kind of wrap things up for the month of October, and yeah, do you want any closing comments?
Well,
And
I would
David
just,
Goldstein too. The two of you really
yeah,
put this on.
we can both say something. I'll be real quick. I would just encourage anyone on here to look into your areas, look up October Blind Awareness Month. I'm sure there's some activities and events that you can participate in. I just, shameless plug, I just did a walk last week for Foundation Fighting Blindness. So that was just one event for October, but there's White Cane Day coming up on the 15th. There's World Sight Day. There's a host of things going on this month. And if this is sort of like piqued your interest into learning more about accessibility or about audio description, or just what other unique things there are to the blindness community, this is a great time to do that.
Yeah, there
David.
really are. There really are a lot of great things going on, and I'm sure Melissa could tell us about what's coming up on the 15th in San Francisco. But just so many good things coming along. And the one thing that I would leave with folks, if you're thinking about doing it, it doesn't have to be something extravagant to start out with. Like I said,
Yeah.
and Lisa, I think, still uses it to this day as a Sennheiser headset with the
Sure
boom arm
do.
with the mic
That's
on
what
it,
I'm on
and
now.
start there, and then just go from there. Hone the skills and just keep going with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Thomas, Edwina, Melissa, Annie. Thank you so much. This has been great. And I agree with Goldberg. I wish we had another hour because we certainly, I think, only scratched the surface. But hopefully this won't be a one and done, and we will regroup in some other event or
I agree. And another
awareness
shout out
month.
to Jerry who offered quite a bit of information.
Yes,
And
yes.
I
Thank you,
think
Jerry.
Diego too at some point was offering information. I'm not sure if I see him on any longer. Thank you everyone for contributing. and for enjoying, for enjoying and hopefully enjoying this program. Okay, this concludes episode 26 of our home studio show and tells. Good night, everyone. Or
And thank you
as
again,
Annie says,
Goldberg.
Annie,
Bye.
whatever time it is, wherever you are watching. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
David. Thanks for
Bye.
hosting.
Yes, thank you.
Bye, everyone.